Hey everyone, this is Craig with NGP Van. Thank you for joining us for this awesome webinar that we have ready to roll with Valley Mail. We're going to be talking about increasing deliverability in the political and advocacy spaces. Thanks for joining. We are just getting rolling now. It is 1 o'clock, so we're going to leave about a minute or so for participants to join. So we had a couple hundred registrations, which is great. So it may take a minute for everyone just to pop in. The participant number is counting, which is good. So I usually make a joke about not being able to sing at the beginning of these, and that's probably a good idea. So we'll just chat for a minute as everyone joins and go through maybe some introductions and then some housekeeping for how we can interact with the webinar. We like to make these super interactive, if at all possible. So again, thanks for joining, and we're going to try to keep this to an hour or less. Usually at the 45-minute space, we like to break for Q&A. So let's jump into it. Maybe we'll start with introductions. So I'm Craig. I'm the program director for NGP Van. We are also joined by Al, who's from Valley Mail, and Sandro, who's here from NGP Van. I will turn it over to them to give quick introductions for themselves and their work.
Thanks, Craig. Hi, everybody. I'm Al Iverson. I work for a company called Valley Mail in the DMARC and email authentication space. But my background is email deliverability. I've been blogging about deliverability for more than 20 years with my blog, Spam Resource. And for just over 15 years, I was director of deliverability for Salesforce Marketing Cloud. Done a fair bit of consulting with clients on deliverability related issues. Some of those actual political senders on both sides of the spectrum. So a little bit of that in my blood as well.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Sandro. I am the email deliverability manager for NGP Van. Been with the company for a few years now. My background is in political email, so I used to send emails for candidates and state parties and PACs. And now I work with clients who are having deliverability issues and making sure that our sending infrastructure is in a good place. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, Al and Sandro. It's great to have you. We're also going to be joined in our chat and to answer some of the technical questions here. So as Al is chatting and Sandro is chatting, I'll be answering some questions, jumping into the chat. Also, our director of partnerships is here. Alex Chuddy is here, and she might jump into the chat as well as a panelist. So you might see her name there. So a couple housekeeping things here. The Q&A is specifically for questions. So if you have a question, drop it into the Q&A and we will answer those as we go along. If I can answer them, I'll do that. Depending on the content that's being presented, I might interrupt Al and Sandra nicely and ask them to answer the questions as we go live if it's a really relevant topic. Otherwise, we might hold it till the end when we do the Q&A. Whenever we do these webinars, if we can't get to your question or don't have the answer before the time runs out, we will make a note of every unanswered question, and then all of us will round up to answer that question, and we'll put that in a follow-up email, usually within a day or two. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, but it doesn't go that long. And we'll get you the answers to your questions before too long, a couple days, like I said, usually. So that's for Q&A. If you want to just chit-chat, obviously you can put that in the chat. I put a question out there, for everyone to let us know where you're from, just so we know where people are. Actually, someone just put something from Oxford, England. That's great. So we are international today. Let us know who you are, where you're from. If you're working with an org or if you're working with a campaign, just drop that in the chat and we'll chat as we go along. Occasionally, we will interrupt the presentation. We'll put up a poll related to email practices and things like fundraising and DMARC and things like that. So you might see the polls come across there as well. And then last but not least, because we usually get asked this, we are recording this. And when we're done, what we'd like to do is we like to transcribe this. I believe you can turn on transcriptions now if you need accessibility for any options there. I believe Zoom allows you to turn that on and it's live transcribed. If anyone needs that, that's available or should be available. And if for some reason it's not, we always do that with our recordings anyway. So when our recording is done, we make sure that it has captions and it's transcribed, and then that goes on our YouTube page, and we'll follow up with an email to everyone giving them access to this video, the recording, and also the deck that we're using too. So don't feel like you have to take notes, just kind of sit back and listen to what's being presented and ask questions as they come to mind. So that is the quick housekeeping. Cool. So very quick, I'll jump into the agenda and then turn it over to our esteemed guests here, the experts. We're going to cover a few things in this webinar. If there are other things you'd like us to cover, if we have time, drop it into the chat and we'll try to cover it as we go through the content. And if not, we'll cover it later with questions. But we're going to talk about what is deliverability? What does it mean? What does a reputation mean in terms of email and sending email? We're going to talk about the CAN-SPAM Act, specifically in the political space too. We're going to talk about domain reputation and the new sender requirements from the different email programs. We're going to talk about good practices and I think what we're calling less good practices, and probably have a little bit of a debate in terms of what is a good practice and what's maybe not such a good practice. I think you might be interested to see what some of those less good practices are. We'll talk about campaign security and domain security. Both of those things are extremely important, and we'll talk about ways that you can kind of audit your security or understand how to increase your security. And then we'll give you a few options to learn more, inform your reading and your research and your own work in implementing the tips that we're going to give you today. And at the end, we'll end with a Q&A and go from there. So that's our agenda. If there's anything that you'd like to see that's not on here, drop it in the chat or pop a question in. And we've got one from Marianne already, where she's mentioning something about a computer idiot. If you are not computer literate and you need help with this, of course, we will have some resources up at the end. And of course, a way that you can get a hold of Sandro and Al separately. So please keep dropping the questions in the chat in there. And now I will stop talking and turn it over to our experts. Al, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thanks, Craig. Hi, everybody. Let's kick it off here with an overview of what we mean when we talk about deliverability. Let's define what that means when it's specific to email, and then specific to email and sort of the political and advocacy realms. But at its core, what deliverability is the measure, means, method, a way of getting email delivered to the inbox. So if you are successful with deliverability, that means that you are able to get email delivered to the inbox properly. It's gone right where you want it to go for people to be able to see your messages. If you're having mail go to the spam folder or not get delivered at all, those are signs that you are potentially having a deliverability issue. Something's impeding that ability to get mail delivered to the inbox. And deliverability is, it's a bit of study, a bit of measure, a bit of practice, a bit of technical, a bit of strategic, and we'll sort of break down those different sort of columns and how those all sort of interact and come together to define how you maximize your chances to get mail delivered to the inbox successfully. But at its core, if there is one sentence to define how you measure and understand deliverability, that would be signals and feedback, the last line there. Those are really the primary drivers of deliverability and reputation. And I said there's sort of different, the octopus has many tendrils right here. So here's a few of the most important ones. You can sort of group them into three very important groups. That's the technical and strategic are the first two there. The technical being all of your email settings, your header settings, the platform settings. What are the things that NGP Van does for you automatically when they configure your email to dispatch it to the world after you hit send? The proper email authentication signature, proper unsubscribe link positioning and processing, all those different things that are required to comply with the different technical requirements put forth by the mailbox providers, the inbox providers. By those we mean Gmail, Yahoo, Microsoft Outlook.com, all of the different places that receive mail, that host the mailboxes of the people you're trying to send mail to. So that's the technical bit, right? That's the first leg of this. Well, I'll call it the three-legged octopus. That's a horrible term. We should never use that again after this webinar. But the middle part of it here, the middle tendril, if you will, is the strategic bit of deliverability. So what the technical can help you set up, the strategic can help you knock it down for better or for worse. even the best email platform in the world is not that great at getting unwanted, uninteresting, spammy, poorly targeted email delivered. So that's where strategic is a necessary component of deliverability success. Comes from all of the bits that go into email marketing strategy, email sending strategy, setting proper expectations, make sure people know that they're going to get mail from you, that they're signing up, that they're opting in for that, that they're not getting mail from you unexpectedly, that it's wanted mail, it's expected mail, and it's interesting mail. It has to be something that's akin to their interests. And that's because engagement is such an important measure used by those inbox providers like your Gmail, like your Yahoo, to determine whether or not they think you're a good sender or a bad sender, to determine whether or not your mail should go to the inbox or go to the spam folder. So that's where strategic is so important, that being able to target your messaging to drive engagement and then learn over time how to improve that engagement through better content, through better segmentation, etc. Those are all the necessary strategic components of deliverability success. And then the last bit there, this is the thing that can really get you thrown off the island there, to switch metaphors midstream, and now we're talking about Survivor, the TV show. What will get you thrown off of the island? And that's negative signals, negative feedback, that the mailbox providers collect all of this data they solicit this data from their users. They ask their users to click the report spam button to tell them that a mail from you or from somebody else, that mail message is unwanted. And so those messages, that feed, the messages that get reported, that feeds into a data set that those mailbox providers use to sort of rank and correlate senders, to group them and decide who deserves to be allowed into inbox island, who deserves to be pushed to the side to the spam folder, or who deserves to be blocked outright. So there's a whole bunch of things that can come into play there. Things like I started with there, the spam complaint rates, people hitting that report spam button. That's one of the most strongest negative indicators that can impede your ability to get mail delivered to the inbox successfully. On top of that, there's high bounce rates, attempting to send a lot of mail to addresses that are not going through. Lots of rejections are another thing that mailbox providers will notice. And then blocklist issues as well. When it comes down to blocklist issues, can be a little bit of a tricky thing, where there's 90 different blocklists in the world. And anybody can stand them up. They're sort of lists of IP addresses that the publisher or the maintainer has decided that they're engaging in spam or some unsavory practice. And their recommendation to the world is that nobody accept mail from that list, those IP addresses on that list. Problem is, because anybody can do it, it doesn't mean that anybody has subscribed to it. Like if some random guy, in a basement with just him and his cat put this block list together, doesn't mean that Yahoo or Gmail use this block list as a reputation signal to determine whether or not you get to the inbox at Yahoo or Gmail. So keep in mind, out of those 90 odd block lists in the world, some of them are very important, very well subscribed to. Spamhaus, for example, is a perfect example. But there's really only probably about that top dozen or so that are most widely used. And some of them might even be legitimate, but have no bearing to a US political sender. Like UCE Protect is a great example of a block list that if you're trying to send to small municipal entities in Germany, that can be a significant impediment to deliverability. But if you're only sending to US mailboxes at the big providers, UCE Protect block listing is not going to affect you at all. So there's lots of nuance there. And the reason I sort of focus on that a lot is people will plug their sending IP address, I'll pull a header apart and put it in a lookup tool and say, oh my God, you're on 40 block lists. And sometimes that's a sort of FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, trying to generate deliverability related discussions for whatever consultant or whatever website or lookup tool you put that in. So remember that there's a lot of nuance there, and that a block list issue does not necessarily correlate to deliverability issue. It can, but there's also a lot of exceptions to that too.
Al, I know we're going to get into this. If you just go back one slide real quick, I know we're going to get into this later when we talk about good and less good. And you mentioned here just setting proper expectations. One of the things that I've noticed, and I wonder if you have a comment on this, when people subscribe to emails, just simply telling them the frequency with which you're going to email them, I've found has kind of let them know what to expect. Saying like, hey, we're going to email you twice a week, or we're going to email you once a month, or that kind of thing helps to reduce some of those spam complaints that they might, otherwise get for not realizing how much you're going to send them messages.
Absolutely, and not hiding it in the terms and conditions. The point is to make it clear what the person's signing up for, not bury it in page 3 of a 4-page T&C, way buried in the footer, below the fold, next page, behind the link, whatever. The key there is just to make it clear that these people are choosing to sign up, right? You don't certainly you want to put your best foot forward from a marketing perspective to entice them to sign up, but you don't want to do that through something where you have to hide the nature of what sort of agreement they're entering into. The clearer you can make that, the less likely you are to have spam complaints later. That is the one that's the biggest driver. That's what kills deliverability is spam complaints. And why do people report spam? They're unhappy about the mail for a multitude of reasons, but the top one is always, this is not what I expected. I didn't sign up for this. You didn't tell me I was going to get this content or this cadence of email. So the clearer you can be with that, the better you are positioned for deliverability, inbox placement success. Excuse me, pausing to take a sip of water there. Because we're talking about the political and advocacy spaces, I wanted to touch on canned spam in particular, because canned spam has a couple of unique things in it that do apply to the political sphere, but a lot of people sort of get it wrong or misunderstand. In what ways does it actually affect things, or in what ways does it not actually affect things? The core of canned spam is really meant to govern email marketing. It's not intended to cover political advocacy mail. There's little wiggle room. If somebody's sending out an advocacy related mailing, is that marketing or not? Is there some sort of consideration or expectation as a result of that? I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into that. But what I will tell you is that it's the starting point for what mailbox providers use as their guidelines to decide what mail to block or not. And so it has some good stuff there that you have to be aware of, because it's going to apply to you even if you're not a marketing sender. Since mailbox providers, the Yahoos, the Gmails, the Microsofts of the world, are applying some version of these rules to all bulk senders. All of the stuff inbound is assumed to have to comply with this to some degree. Some of it is very obvious, very simple stuff, disallowing falsity, making sure that it's easy to unsubscribe. You're identifying who the sender is. The content is not deceptive in any way. You're not, sending a subject line that says, "Hey, your building is on fire," only to open the email and says, "Please donate to our campaign." That's not how that works. It has to be clear that there has to be a connection between what's being sent, the content, and then the ask, all related there. Canned spam also does something very handy for opt-in permission. They set a standard called the affirmative consent standard. So again, it's intended for types of marketing mail, but it's the standard that these mailbox providers effectively look to. Clear opt-in, not hiding opt-in verbiage in terms and condition, that sort of thing. It doesn't specifically touch on stuff like double opt-in. It doesn't specifically lay out that it's prohibited to list swap or buy list, but the key there is that they are setting so that if you want to be able to say, "Hey, my lists are opt-ins, I am complying with opt-in best practices," that's where you look for that standard, that affirmative consent standard, meaning that somebody signs up for your mail, that you're not just adding them to the list for some other reason other than the consumer, the recipient, initiated that sign up. And again, there's some cutouts here where it applies to marketing mail. So political mail is not really contemplated by some of these rules here, but mailbox providers are effectively indemnified both under canned spam and the Communications Decency Act to basically block whatever they want in their best efforts to block unwanted stuff, whether that be yucky stuff or just unhappy stuff or just spam, right? Providers are generally allowed to do what they want, meaning you do not have a basis. You as a person, you as a company, you as a campaign do not have a great basis with which to go after and sue Microsoft or Gmail or somebody else to say you're unfairly blocking my mail. Most of these providers would respond with, we are following the wishes of our users, and our users are telling us that they don't want this mail. We respect that and we defend that. You're going to see there's been stuff happening there with one particular party trying to sue Google, not having a lot of success in that regard. Where it will end up, who knows? But right now, where things have been historically is providers are not going to let you through and deliver your mail to the inbox if you're doing things that they consider spammy, and they are not going to give you a free pass just because you're sending political or advocacy mail. The key here, the key takeaway, forget all the rest of this, the key takeaway here is mailbox providers block millions of political messages every day. So if you want to get through and get noticed, these are the effective guidelines to make you stand out above and beyond what everybody else is doing. Opt-in permission, clear consent, clear expectations, and don't rely on a crutch and say like we're CAN-SPAM compliant. That's not the point, or even to say that CAN-SPAM doesn't apply here. It doesn't. There's all this nuance around it, and these are the rules that the industry has decided on, with this as its very basic starting point. So if you're not doing opt-in, you're not going to have long-term inbox success. You'll find people that tell you otherwise, and will do things to try to get around that, but they'll do things for short-term success versus, I've been helping people send emails successfully for 25 odd years now, and long-term success is kind of a nice place to be. You get it right, and it keeps growing, and it keeps working.
Hey, Al, we had a question from David who asked specifically about CAN-SPAM. Two questions, but I think we could probably tackle them at the same time. One is, are there differences between countries in how email providers assess emails as spam? And in parentheses, I found more problems with internet in the UK. And then the second question, which seems related, is how similar or different are CAN-SPAM rules with those of GDPR that we have to follow across Europe?
Yeah, I will say my sphere of deep knowledge is very US centric. So unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do a deep dive on GDPR in particular. I will tell you that the goal of most of these rules, wherever they are, whether it's CASL, Canada's anti-spam legislation, or GDPR in the EU, the core there is opt-in permission. There's some other stuff around data handling and right to forget, for example, that goes beyond that. But if you want to comply with the mailbox provider requirements in all these different places, what they want is happy users. What happy users want is expected mail. So it's opt-in and setting expectations. To be clear, yeah, there can be little nits beyond that. You'll find some people that will tell you that they interpret the law as saying in Germany you have to do double opt-in. I don't know that I would totally bank on that being a requirement, though you will find a few people that say that very loudly. It's something you have to do your own research. But again, at the core of it, at the actual what mailbox providers want worldwide is their users to be happy, and what makes your users happy is wanting mail. And the one caveat there too is, who is the biggest mailbox provider in almost every country? It's either Microsoft or Google or Yahoo. Some smaller countries, there's some exceptions to this. Yahoo is less represented overseas, for example, compared to Gmail. Gmail tends to be bigger. Microsoft can be a little bit bigger. And certainly there are some regional players that get bigger in those spaces, but there are a lot of American hosted and American policy driven mailboxes that are being used by users in other countries. Meaning Microsoft's going to want you to be opt-in by their standards. Gmail's going to want you to be opt-in by their standards, etc., no matter what country you're in.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add too, specifically about the UK, is it seems like it is one of those places where some of the regional players are a bit bigger. BT Internet, for sure. I noticed in the last general election last week that they do tend to be a bit stricter, but like Al said, just to underscore, a lot of the major mailbox providers are the same and they use the same rules. Also, just out of curiosity, are you with the Liberal Democrats? Because if so, congrats on all of the seats last week. Yeah,
Sandra, this is a
so
good transition to you. Go ahead.
yeah, there we go. Well, great. Yeah, just this section kind of builds off of a lot of what Al was talking about previously with domain reputation, specifically the strategic component and the signals components. When you're talking about email reputation, there are two buckets of reputation that are important. The first is the reputation of the IPs that you send from. Which is what we manage. You're sending from our IPs. They generally have solid reputation and an established sending history. Um, and the second is your domain reputation, uh, which has become increasingly more important over the last few months especially since the Gmail and Yahoo changes went into effect, which we'll talk about a bit later. And we're seeing increasingly that mailbox providers are making filtering decisions based on domain reputation, which is why I want to emphasize it here. So you can kind of think of domain reputation as a score for your specific sending domain. Um, Mailbox providers will assign kind of a proprietary score, if we want to call it that, to your domain based on the signals you send them. So things like spam complaints, unsubscribes, opens, clicks, your open rate, all of the things that Al was talking about are used in that open rate calculation. And engagement is an extremely important factor in that. Um, One thing we've seen is with the kind of like increased importance on domain reputation that especially political senders be who may be using some of those less good practices that we'll talk about are seeing increased bounces from people. And so it's really important to kind of think about this over the next few months as we hit the November election. In the past, one thing I'll say is that it was a lot easier for senders to kind of stay in the crowd of a shared IP where you could use the reputation of other senders and the reputation of the IP to kind of get along. But now it's a lot easier for mailbox providers to kind of pick you out of a crowd and kind of classify you by how you've been sending.
Hey,
So,
Sandro, I wanted just to launch this poll real quick. If we could do it now, I think around your
yeah,
reputation, it's good. Just to get a sense of, the conversation about domain and reputation. I'm going to launch a quick poll related to whether or not people are using NGP for their email sending. So that poll probably just came up on screen. Um, and if you could fill it out real quick as you're rolling, and then hopefully that doesn't cover what everyone sees. It might a little bit. And then once that's done, I'll jump on to the next, or we can jump on to the next. And then we had a quick question from Marty, who asked, can we send individual emails that are not part of bulk email, asking people to add our email address to their contacts so that they don't get spam boxed? Is that possible? Is that recommended?
that is not possible. So in targeted email, in order to send an email, all of the addresses have to be subscribed. I I'm curious about the acquisition method of those emails. But yeah, in general, an email address does have to be subscribed in order to send to it. Thanks for that question.
Yeah. And if you have a large list, it would probably be impractical to send individual emails, like through Gmail or some other way to try to get those people to understand. Possible that maybe in an opt-in, like on a web form, you could send them to a page that says, hey, remember to, white box this or whitelist this domain or this address. But, that would be fairly manual, I think. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, so while we wait for the results of the poll, I'll carry on. But uh, building your reputation as a sender is extremely important. And I see that we have it's about 50-50 of people who use us and don't use us. if you do sign up to use us, it's important that, and this is with any platform, that you build up your reputation slowly to let mailbox providers know that you're sending wanted mail to to engaged recipients who have opted in and want your mail. So you send good signals to mailbox providers. So if you do sign up for NGP Van, it's important to not sign up and then send 10 million emails the next day. That's a huge volume spike, and it doesn't put you off on the best foot. Um, and it's good to start with kind of your most opted in people and go from there and be responsive to the signals you're receiving in terms of spam complaints, your open rate, unsubscribes, and kind of adjust from there as you go. And the same is true if you find that you are being if you are being rate limited or your mail is bouncing due to your domain reputation. It's important to kind of like reset expectations with those mailbox providers and improve your sending over time. So it depends on what kind of problem you're having, but you may want to start from zero or take a break or kind of dial back. And that's something we can help you with too. Yeah, and another important aspect of domain reputation is kind of being consistent in your sending. So you'll want to minimize like huge volume spikes, or maybe if I sit closer to the mic, that'll help. Um, is that any better?
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Um, yeah, one thing we saw very recently was with the debate 2 weeks ago. We saw a lot of clients who went from sending nothing to sending like very large emails after long pauses. To kind of try to engage people around the presidential debate. And we saw those clients have a lot of issues. So it's important to kind of be consistent. Don't triple your audience overnight, things like that. Use consistent branding and domains. So this is really important if you're having an issue with your sending domain. If your domain reputation you're noticing isn't great, you don't want to just switch your domain. And domain hop, because if you don't solve the root cause of that, you'll end up with the same issues as well. And that also goes to setting the cadence of your mail and setting expectations with your subscribers. Letting them know how many emails they're opting into, the fact that they are opting in, and sending consistently, kind of on a decent schedule, will also pay dividends.
Yeah, consistency really is key there, right? It's all about making sure that they have a clear picture of who you are, they being the mailbox providers, and an uninterrupted picture of it. That's, people will naturally have some peaks and valleys, and it might be unavoidable to some degree. But the more you can do to minimize that and have a steady pace means you're going to have steady stats, means you're going to have reliable, reproducible success.
I'm going to post something in the chat real quick. I didn't check the entire participant list, but to see if anyone from Middle Seat is on. But last year we did a great case study and a separate webinar with Middle Seat. They were using one of our products, Action Kit, and they were monitoring spam and spam boxing in real time and using changes there with Action Kit to basically counteract that and to make sure that their emails were getting through at a higher rate. And it is amazing the levels that they were able to achieve. And it's super important when it comes, if you're really relying on email for fundraising, the percent that they're able to increase fundraising by making sure that their emails get through. But I'll post a link to that case study in the webinar so people can check it out, because it's exactly what you're talking about here.
Yeah, that sounds definitely that's interesting. Thank you. And yeah, kind of what's driving this big emphasis on domain reputation are these changes that Google and Yahoo announced last year that went into effect in February. And there are a few things that it requires. If you're using us for email at NGP Van, you're probably already compliant, but we'll talk about how you can check. But The first piece is to authenticate your mail with SPF and DKIM. Um, and just to give you kind of a very brief overview of what these are, DKIM is a digital signature that goes on every one of your emails that lets mailbox providers know, hey, this is me, I'm authorizing it, this is truly my mail. And SPF is a record that lets them know that you're authorizing our platform to be the one that handles your mail. So you're sending from our IP addresses and mail servers and authenticating with DKIM. DMARC is an extra layer on top of that, which Al will get into a little bit later, but it is a very important security protocol, which is also now required by Gmail and Yahoo as part of their bulk sender requirements. Um, Another important requirement is that you have easy unsubscribe and the one click unsubscribe header. Those are technical requirements that we handle for you at NGP. So that's something we handle on the technical side. But a very important aspect of the requirements is that you keep your complaint rates low um, and consistently low. So the guideline that they use is 0.3% spam complaint rate over time. And that is relatively high. I would say most people start to experience inboxing issues at around 0.1%, which is 1 in 1,000 people complaining about your email and marking it as spam. But keeping that complaint rate at 0.3% or below is extremely important in order to be compliant with the Gmail and Yahoo requirements.
And a couple things I'll add here too. We discussed, like, do we talk about the unsubscribed headers and some of the other stuff? We don't necessarily want to give people this false impression that there's extra stuff that they have to necessarily go set up when the platform does it for you. And so it's important to highlight that these requirements are a mix of things that the sending platform will do for you automatically, and stuff you need to keep in mind as well. Make sure that you're working with NGP Van to set up, make sure email authentication's in place, for example, and making sure that you're sending wanted mail to wanted lists so that complaint rates are low and so forth. The key there being it's a mix of stuff. Some of it's platform stuff, and some of it's really stuff that the end user, the actual person hitting the send button, needs to be aware of. One other thing too I wanted to add here before we get too far away from it. What the big change with all of this is this: Gmail is getting better at identifying unwanted or borderline unwanted mail. If the mail's not interesting, they are more likely to drop it in the spam folder or more likely to block it outright today than they were a year ago. And people will come and say sometimes, I've been doing things the same way since 2012. Why am I seeing trouble now? Well, now this is an example of these requirements are evolving. They do not stay static for years. Gmail and Yahoo and Microsoft and others are working to tighten up spam filters to let less spam through. And so the closer you rode to that edge previously could put you it would put you in the inbox in the past, could put you over the line today, and suddenly you're not going to get inbox anymore. So keep in mind that's the one thing to walk away from here with the Gmail and Yahoo requirements. They are getting better at identifying unwanted mail than they were in the past.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. Another thing I would add too is that mailbox provider requirements do change all the time. So it's important to kind of follow best practices regardless. Microsoft is also floating the idea of implementing their own bulk sender requirements at some point in the unspecified future. So it's not something you need to worry about now, but they can and do make changes all the time. So it's important to be consistent and follow best practices in your sending. So yeah, just briefly about compliance, I do want to put in a plug for Google Postmaster tools. This is kind of the definitive source for your sending reputation with Google and in Gmail. It's a free tool. It's very helpful, and it can show you your spam complaint rate, so you can stay compliant. Um, Another tool that I want to plug and also answer Mark's question here is about my email. you can send kind of a sample email or a real email to it to get a sense of uh, whether you're compliant in the good practices section. One thing I will note is that DMARC can align either off of the SPF or the DKIM record. So uh, with NGP, the DKIM record does sign with your sending domain, but the SPF record uses our bounce domain. So using a tool like About My Email or potentially the Valley Mail DMARC monitor that Mark was talking about, could show that SPF isn't passing, but your SPF record is fine. It's just not aligning for DMARC purposes, and that usually isn't an issue. We can if you reach out to us, we can talk more about it, but did want to point that out.
Yeah, and in the context of alignment here, what alignment means is the authenticating domain matches the from domain. So the DKIM, if DKIM is aligned, that means that the DKIM signature has been told to cover aliverson.com while I send as aliverson.com. Since the from matches the DKIM with the same domain, that's alignment. And for DMARC to pass, authentication to pass all the checks, you need to have at least one of the SPF settings or DKIM setting aligned. And so I apologize, it gets a little technical, but you will run into situations like with NGP Van, like with a lot of ESPs, where they set their own SPF record that uses their own domain. That's totally fine, totally normal. You're in full compliance with all those requirements as long as it shows DMARC align and DKIM align, or flip it around, DKIM align, the DMARC align, and you're good to go in there. Always, and I always keep in mind, these are About My Email is a third-party tool. We don't necessarily have control over it if they add a new check or fumble a check, but for the most part, it has seemed to be pretty good, pretty helpful. So this is one of my favorite slides here, and to try not to take up the whole rest of the time talking about this one. But when I look at this slide, I have a very clear vision in my head of two different political senders that I've dealt with. The really good sender is my Illinois state representative. She's a great person. She lives in my neighborhood. She sends out weekly newsletters on updates on what she's doing for work. She requests feedback from the community. She's very interactive with the community. Everybody loves her emails. We all sign up for her emails. She doesn't just buy lists and send millions of emails asking for people to send her money. She actually has a relationship with the community, and that's reflected in the high engagement and good inbox placement of her emails. Versus the less good sender of it, or the person in my mind's eye, who I will not name, was an aldermanic candidate in my ward in Chicago, running against the incumbent a couple of years ago. She bought a list, she sent to the list. She got a lot of flack for it, a lot of unhappy responses, low engagement. Got kicked off of the email platform she was using, trying to do that on. Reason for that is people really didn't want those emails because she went out and bought a list of just everybody she could get her hands on in our neighborhood, in our ward. And that's going to include a lot of people who would never have voted for her, had no intention of voting for her. So she intentionally, it's like waving a red flag in front of a bull, practically. It's saying, hey, here I am. You don't like me. Do something about it. Start yelling about it. And that's exactly what people did. So it's just an example of head-to-head, good sender versus less good sender, right? All she did is send lots of email trying to make money and then disappeared unsuccessful, and we never heard from her again, versus the good side of it is ongoing relationship, ongoing interaction, ongoing engagement.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add is, especially in the political space, list purchases, swaps, delayed swaps, joint actions are all very popular, because I know people tend to be on shorter time horizons and there's a lot of fundraising pressure, but they're truly never worth it. They perform very poorly. You get a lot of negative signals. And when I was a consultant sending email, we did a few studies on kind of the payback time of these lists. I think the average was 5 to 6 years, factoring in staff time. So they're not even really profitable in most cases. And I know kind of list growth is hard and acquisition is hard, but buying, renting, swapping lists, things like joint actions are are truly never worth it. So I would recommend staying away wholeheartedly.
All right, thank you for that, Sandro. I think we're in the home stretch. 2-minute explanation here. What is DMARC? DMARC is the icing on the cake on top of email authentication. It adds email security on top of email authentication. It prevents people from spoofing your domain, pretending to be you. It's very important now, especially because Yahoo and Google require that you set up a DMARC record. They don't necessarily say that you can have to configure it a certain way. You don't necessarily have to secure your domain. You just have to take those first steps to implement DMARC. Now, it's still very important to protect your domains. We'll talk more about that here in a second. But the start here is you set up a DMARC record. You can tell the world what to do when mail purports to be from you, but doesn't pass the authentication checks. It says it's from you. So that's how you keep somebody from sending out mail that uses your domain from getting delivered successfully. You can block phishing and spoofing dead in its tracks with DMARC. That's where you want to do it. And bad guys try to exploit weak or missing DMARC. Well, North Korea was in the news a couple months ago for targeting domains that were using a weak DMARC setting, P equals none policy, to use this to spoof, to try to gather intelligence, about their East Asian, sphere of the world, and try to gather intelligence about that. So it's not necessarily that local elections are necessarily going to be targeted by North Korean hackers, but where one bad guy leads, others are sure to watch and potentially follow. And so it highlights the need for the security inherent in DMARC. And that's where ValaMail can potentially help if you need it. We have free DMARC monitoring called ValaMail Monitor. We can help you if you need that deeper dive review to help review all of your mail streams, understand what's happening, get yourself to a place where you can enforce blocking of phished and spoofed mail. That's what our ValaMail Enforce tool does. And then there's also the sort of the cherry that goes on the icing on the cake is the BIMI logo. BIMI is a standard that lets you put a sender logo, a trademarked sender logo. So there can be some limitations there depending on what a campaign is doing or how they're registered. But it helps to boost engagement, and it's valuable at some providers, not all. Microsoft doesn't have it, but Gmail and Yahoo and Apple all support the BIMI logo. So we can help with all of that and more. If you want to learn more, you can find that at valamail.com. Last bit here. We work with Defending Digital Campaigns, a very important organization, the goal of which is to help campaigns protect their digital assets, to keep their infrastructure and mechanisms safe and usable. And so Defending Digital Campaigns is really more focused on national campaigns. There's 4 states, Ohio, Michigan, and a couple others that escape me at the moment, that some lower level down to almost municipal level campaigns can qualify for free or low cost digital security assistance from DDC. But we are part of that assistance. So we work with DDC where we go to them, and if they map out what they think you need, what you can benefit from, we are often a part of that solution. So if you work with Defending Digital Campaigns, you could ask your DDC rep about email authentication and security and see if there's an option to work with us through that, or click on through and learn about it and better understand what your potential options are, or just be aware of it. And to that end, where else can you go to learn more about this? The last thing I'll do here, and then I'll stop taking up all the air in the room, is I want to plug my spam resource blog. Somebody was saying, hey, I'm not really an email expert. I don't know all this stuff. Where do I go to start to learn about this stuff? Hopefully my blog at Spam Resource can help with that. Got a weekly email newsletter where I summarize everything that's in the blog for the past week. A lot of email history, a lot of explanation of evolving sender requirements and that sort of thing. Some of it's technical. I apologize in advance. Sometimes it's hard to explain the nature of an engine without pulling the engine apart and holding up pieces. But I do try to explain to the layperson as much as possible. So please do check it out if you can. All right, Craig, what do you think? Shall we open things up for questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple questions here that I'll go through. And actually, this is a good time. I'm going to hit the poll real quick. Let me launch that now. I think that worked. Okay, so you should see a poll coming up. So a few people are asking, where can we get more info? Al has these resources up here, which is great. You can see Valley Mail's link there. You can see NGP Van's link there. You can see Defend Campaigns and Spam Resource. If you would like to have a conversation with Al specifically or someone from the Valley Mail team, in an effort not to spam everybody who attended, if you want to reach out to someone at their team, just answer yes here, and we'll make sure that they get your information, and then they could follow up with you directly. That will be separate from the recap webinar email that we send to everybody. That's just going to be a link with the video. But if you want to learn more and want to chat with Al or somebody from the team, pop yes into that survey response. I'll leave it open for a minute or two. That way we can be very specific with who they follow up with. Marty is asking about just general understanding, get a better understanding. Sandra, what's your recommendation for that? Should people email you directly or email support, or should we give them like a support link where they can see resources on the NGP Van website? What do you recommend for people who just maybe want to read up a little more in addition to what Al put here?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think if you are kind of experiencing an issue or just want to talk to me a bit, feel free to reach out to deliverability@ngpvan.com. That's an email that I monitor, and I always like talking with clients and kind of digging in to see what may be going on. I wholeheartedly recommend Al's blog. It's very good. And our help center, help.ngpvan.com, also has some good resources if you want to do some reading on your own.
Cool, thanks. A few other questions. Anthony asked, are signals and domain reputation cyclical? I.e., you've got a spam bump, therefore your domain reputation goes down, therefore your deliverability rate goes down, therefore your domain reputation goes down, etc.
Yeah, effectively, yes. You think of a lot of these reputation metrics are basically a rolling 30-day window. So it kind of does follow there. And at the same time, if it does go down, it's easy to bring it back up to, right? It's not always fun. It can be a little bit of sour medicine if you've really got to pull back and you're sending and reduce your volume or segment away or reconfirm part of your list. So it's one of those things where often an ounce of prevention can be a lot more fun than a pound of cure. But yeah, it is effectively, a rolling metric that can be, it's reflective of recent practices and can be improved or go up or down over time based on changes in practices.
Let me ask a follow-up to that. We had a question about if domain reputation is low, how can they recover and rebuild it? Experts say to send emails to the most engaged users, but if they're going to spam because of reputation issues, how can the most engaged users receive their emails in their inbox and engage positively?
The magic formula there is what we in the industry call TINS, T-I-N-S. This is not spam clicks, and that's what the mailbox providers, Gmail in particular, are looking to have happen when you continue to send to your most engaged subscribers, even if it's sitting in the spam folder. What they're looking for is that for your subscribers to go peek in the spam folder and see, oh my God, you're in the spam folder, but I actually want your mail. That's not fair. Hit the "this is not spam" button or TINS. And it only takes a few of those positive feedback clicks to help point your reputation back in the right direction.
Yeah, and I've worked with many clients in this situation. And it's definitely not fun in the short term, but it does work over time. Like, you will see improvement if you do that.
Cool. We get another question. Let me see here. What is a goal for email click rates? Is there a good goal? Is that very specific to different campaigns or senders? What do you recommend?
Sandra, what do you think? You might know more about this than I, especially from the political side of things.
No, it's a good question. I don't have a specific answer. I think it's definitely a bit of an issue if you're seeing like an extremely low click rate, but I think it kind of depends on your goals and kind of like who you're targeting. I wish I could get more specific, but that's all I've got.
Yeah. Usually what I tell people here is what's the end use of the info you're sending in an email, right? Like, are you sending an email for volunteer engagement, or are you sending an email for event registration, or is it fundraising? And then I would say, think about your goals for that email. If your goal is to raise X number of dollars, are you getting the engagement that's leading to that end goal? Because you can get 1,000 clicks and then no engagement with that end goal. Or you can get 50 clicks and hit your engagement numbers. Maybe you hit a fundraising goal, or maybe you got all the volunteers because they each brought 3 friends. I would probably, this was Valentina that asked that, I would probably try to tie it to the end goal or the end metric for which you're sending that email. And that might be a better measuring stick for success for you. Okay, so we have a couple questions here. Hopefully we can get them all. We got a couple minutes left. Anthony asked about changing domains due to a rebrand. Is it better to entirely change to using that new domain, or should the audience be segmented, like actives get the new domain, non-openers continue getting the old domain? What do you recommend for that kind of setup?
So I recently helped somebody through this, not a political center, but the process is effectively the same, where they were moving from an old platform to a new platform, and the platforms had different domains. And so what we did is, because we wanted to introduce the new platform in bits, in little waves to build it up over time, and not just 100% switch over on some given Thursday. So basically what I did is I helped them plan out a method where they would peel off different types of emails from the old domain and move them over to the new domain, so that you basically, the new domain would get, 1 or 2 types of mail on week one. They would add 2 more different mail streams to week 2, another 2 on week 3, another 3 on week 4. So basically I was using that new domain in little bits growing over time. That's sort of the key. That's what we call or a domain warming or domain ramp up, to sort of introduce that new domain to the world. ISPs like to see that, mailbox providers like that a little bit better, much more likely to go to the inbox, especially over time. If you start off slow, instead of waking up and just start sending millions on day 1 of the new domain.
Okay, we got a few more. We're going to try to get to as many as we can, and then if we don't finish them, I'm looking at all these, and I think we have some easy answers for these, so we'll put them in an email. Let me see what's next. What are some ways to get folks to subscribe outside of having a join our email list on the website? And if somebody subscribed for your race a few years ago, do they need to resubscribe, or do we just need to re-engage them slowly? What do you recommend for that? This is obviously very common in races where they've got a campaign, maybe they won, and they, maybe they're not campaigning until a couple years later. What do you recommend for that?
Yeah, one thing I'll say about the reconfirmation is it is definitely important not to kind of email people out of the blue. So one thing that I've seen people have a lot of success with is kind of a sort of faux confirmed opt-in, where they'll email people at kind of a slow rate to rewarm them and ask them to click a button to confirm that they want to still be on the list. That's a good strategy that I've seen people have a lot of success with, but otherwise just kind of a slow ramp up and not hitting them kind of all at once is a good strategy. In terms of list growth, kind of like your organic engagement channels are going to be best. So people have success with Facebook ads, Meta ads, Google ads, website traffic. There are a lot of ways to do it. I'm curious if you have any other ideas there too, Al.
For me, it's really all about the basics. I think the key there, another area where it overlaps significantly with marketing, is SEO and pay-per-click search Google ads, leading to a microsite, leading directly to a specific sign up, not just dumping somebody on the random main page of the website, right? So it's all about catching people's interested eyeballs, right, through targeting Google ads, and then driving them straight to a very targeted microsite sign up page. That's the way that's been the number one sign up method for marketing and advocacy emails for me, going back for many years. There's a whole bunch of other strategies you can do on top of that are kind of get more specific to other types of emails like newsletters. But for me, it's really going to be about Google ads, Facebook ads, the stuff where people can find you when they're looking for you, and making sure you're in those places where they're going to stumble across you.
Yeah, and that's what I had the most success with too, on campaigns. It really does work.
Okay, I think we've got time for maybe one more. We have a couple here. So for the people who are still on, if you asked a question, and I want to be respectful of time and wrap this up, if we didn't answer your question, we will answer it directly in the follow-up email that comes to you. We have a couple questions about NGP Van and things coming from info@NGP Van. Sandra, I'll connect with you on that separately. But we do have a question about for BIMI, it's hard to convince many campaigns to invest the 6 months to a year it takes to get a logo trademarked. Are there any shortcuts or alternatives? And then there's one more question after that that I think we can get to about DMARC sending numbers of emails, but maybe answer the first one about BIMI.
Yeah, so the short answer is Google's requirements drive a lot of the extra requirements around BIMI. If you work with a campaign that is big enough and lucky enough to be working with Google, please whisper to them that you would like an easier way to do that. That's more people have to do that to help drive that change. We are certainly doing that ourselves. There is there's a Google specific workaround where you can create a Google account for any email address and verify it, and you can apply a sender avatar or sender picture to it, and that will show up as the sender and the little icon next to the sender in Gmail. I do recommend that, but with the caveat that it's meant to be replaced by BIMI, and so as BIMI moves toward a broader adoption, one assumes that Gmail will eventually disable this workaround. But for today, you could get Google account logo, Google account avatar up and running, practically by the end of this call. It's that simple, and definitely recommend it. So you can at least get some brand recognition there, knowing that it's going to be Gmail only.
One last question, then we'll wrap it up here. Our host says DMARC is for senders of over 5,000 emails per day. Is it helpful if they're not that big?
Yes, definitely, because everybody gets spoofed, and especially if you're interesting or weird. But even if you're not interesting or weird, everybody gets spoofed someday, and bad guys are going to send the bad emails. Do you want to keep them from using your domain when they do it? Then yeah, you should look at DMARC. The better off you are protecting it today, the less problems you're going to have tomorrow. And also, we think Google and Yahoo are probably going to lower that 5,000 threshold at some time. So it's like many other razor edge metrics. Don't try to get up to 4,999 before you think about it, because the number will probably drop. And if you want to be future-proof in your config, do DMARC sooner rather than later.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We hit the 1 hour mark here, a little after 2 p.m. Thank you so much to Al and Sandro for the excellent info here. Just a reminder, this was recorded. We will post this. We'll send a follow-up with transcription to everyone via email, probably in the next couple days. Usually takes 24, 48 hours for us to handle all the accessibility and then upload that onto YouTube. And we'll get that out to everyone who registered. If you have additional questions, feel free to send them in, or you could just reply to that email and we'll answer them there too. Thank you again to our hosts, our partners, and thanks everybody for joining. Visit ngpvan.com, check out the resource section for future webinars, and we will see you all soon.